Although you get some wacky stuff where like your soldier has to fire a shot and you watch it go into a barn 3 blocks down, it hits a gas tank. The enemy's 2 feet from him. He misses that badly.
98%
Yeah.
accuracy, more like 2% accuracy.
Yeah, and that happens 5 times in a
Yep.
row, so you're questioning your own will to live at this rate.
Yeah, and XCOM was definitely notorious for stuff like that too. Because again, like I just said, 90% accuracy really is more like 2% accuracy. Guy could be right there.
It's really, it's not an accurate measure of how accurate your firing is. It's how certain your soldier is that they
That's
can make
who.
the shot, which really has nothing to do
No.
with their skill.
It has to do with their confidence. Oh, looks like Billy Bob's really confident. Yeah, he's got a 70% chance to hit that killer. Nope, looks like Billy Bob has missed horribly.
He's so confident he stuck the barrel in the enemy's face, right down his face hole. But no, he misses!
Just as a reminder, this is a spoiler-heavy podcast. The notes for what series will be popping up are in the description. Hi, everybody. Thanks for listening in on this next episode of Gaming Theater Podcast. Now, today's episode is going to be a great one. It's going to be episode 3, Ghouls and Ghosts and the Difficulty Spike of Retro Games. Now, with me is going to be a couple of guests that you probably have heard before from Gaming Theater Present. This, of course, is me, Leo, Geek Scorpio. And how about you guys quickly introduce yourselves?
I'll go ahead and go first then. This is Steven with also part of Gaming Theater Presents too. Recent edition. Also go by Noble Snarf. Go ahead and introduce yourself. Next person who wishes to introduce himself. Go. Chop, chop.
I'm Rob. I also frequent Gaming Theater Presents.
Okay, I guess you're leaving it to that.
I'm sorry, I don't have as many accolades as the rest of you.
Accolades, okay.
No, so he has his own section called By Rob. So...
Oh, okay, fair enough.
And I am Tomato Man, also part of Gaming Theater Presents, but also part of Yield Tomato Gaming on YouTube, where we also host a podcast called On the Screen that Leo's on every single one of.
Most of them. In fact, before we get started, let's go take a trip to the magical merch booth. All right, back again to the magical merch booth. And once again, there's the bard sort of watching over the merch. By watching over, I mean not paying attention to anything, and apparently has left nothing but a pamphlet left behind. All this says is that ask him for more information about your podcast.
Oh, okay. So it's a weird one where basically I specifically curate the the topic, and absolutely nobody else that's involved knows what the topic is until we start recording. So it's kind of an impromptu, on the fly, tip of the tongue kind of thing. What comes to mind at the moment?
All right, great. Well, I'm just going to hang on to this pamphlet and throw it with the pile of other pamphlets we're starting to capture. But this looks like the lines are moving and the show's going to get started, so let's get going. All right. So with this, this is sort of the brief history of how it's going to be a brief history about how older games and retro games have gotten this sort of notoriety of being difficult, and how they've sort of progressed throughout the years of how gaming works on that sort of. So I figured the best way to deal with this is to start chronologically. So we'll start and explore how these games start either feeling difficult or being actually hard, or where the populace has been sort of leaning towards on that. So to start with us off, most of the games have, chronologically speaking, have started from the old arcades and the arcade system from the 60s, 70s, and 80s. The original arcades, because of how their technology was back then, it was less of a concern to make anything harder and more of a concern of making it work. And then about early 80s, probably late 70s, that's when arcades started introducing for their arcade managers difficulty meters that they could set for the arcades back then. They were a thing called dip switches, and some of them will have. Not every game actually had a dip switch for difficulty. For example, Frogger does not have a difficulty spike. So if you're playing Frogger once, that game of Frogger in the arcade is going to be the same every single time. But if you're playing some of the other games out there, such as Donkey Kong is a famous one, they have a setting that lets the manager go in to change the switch so that way they can make the game easier, normal, or hard. But they have to flip that switch. Oh, with that, there's kind of a weird reason for that. From my understanding, it's sort of how the managers there may want to market the way that they want their games. Usually, what will happen is the newer games they will set for a higher difficulty, with the intention that a person may lose that game and therefore try again, and spend more money on that. But for older games, or ones that have sort of died out haven't been as popular, they would set it to an easier difficulty, ideally encouraging more people to just play the game. One of the reasons for this is sort of especially with things called kill screens. Because if you are doing well enough, especially back then, there was a kind of an oversight where they had a programming error. And I don't know if this is just sort of they didn't think about this at the time or just skipped the information for it. But so a famous kill screen is the one in Pacman. Every time you beat one level in Pacman, it adds another icon at the bottom of the screen for Pacman, right? And then and what it does is it adds another image of a fruit, and then another fruit, and then another fruit, and then once you get to about 7 of these, it starts adding in another, because it'll say the last 7 levels that you have, and then at some point the last one will be a key. And then after so many rounds of this, it'll just keep doing keys and adding those on as the images at the bottom. If you're managed to stay in the game up until stage about 256, it will go into a kill screen and lock out. And that's because these are what's called, and this might get a bit technical for some people. They work on a binary 8 system. So if for a binary system, it goes 0, 1, 0, 1, 0, 1. And then once you get to about 8 of these images, if you know binary, that means all 8, so 1, 0, 0, 0, 0, and so on, would make the number 255. At 256, though, it'll add one more number, and there's not a spot to put a 9th number, which kills off the whole screen, and it looks like someone just vomited code all over the screen.
Specifically, what happens is that it goes to a negative number. It'll go from positive 255 to negative 255. And if your code isn't expecting to handle a negative number, it doesn't know what to do, and you get, code vomited all over your screen.
Yeah, there's a similar thing that happens. Well, not necessarily something that happens, but it's tied to the same element. Is stats in early RPGs. The stat levels for characters was actually maxed at 255 because it's a matter of the maximum value attributable to a single byte in the data or something like that. So that's why your stat max is 255. I think that's also why some games like the Tales of series, the maximum player level is 255. Like even on Tales of Vesperia on the 360, you have new game pluses, and even then the top level is like 250 or 255. So I feel like that's probably somehow connected, since the Tales series has been around since the Super Nintendo.
Yeah, in more modern computer programming and gaming and whatnot, it's likely more done as an in-joke.
Probably.
Back in the day, an extra byte of memory was a lot.
Yes, it was.
An extra byte of memory to handle the level number you were on. Who wants to spend that kind of time? Who's even going to get that high? Let's not spend the resources on it that could be better used for other stuff. Nowadays, an extra byte of memory for your number is not that big of a deal.
Especially with games having gigs of data that's just stored now. Yeah, we're talking bytes versus not even a megabyte. We're talking singular bytes for this game to
Not
work.
even a KB, man.
Mm.
Just byte.
Just bytes. Now, so with that though, they kind of made an interesting deal. So a lot of them will go into this is what builds up tournament gaming to see basically how far you can get with one quarter and just go. And I mean, there's still arcade tournaments going on today for that. This will come into play later because another arcade hit that comes out later at some point, I think late 80s, the original Street Fighter, not Street Fighter 2, but the first one. It was and Kung Fu no Karate Master I think is the name of that game, but they were designed as versus games, and so there weren't a difficulty spike in there because it was expected that somebody else would be your opponent. They just added a computer to just take over for it. But this sort of blends itself better for like tournament play. You have two people challenging themselves. So old school arcade tournaments for like Pac-Man and such, they would get to the kill screen. Someone would be witnessing who the referee, because you'd have to have a referee to watch this, would witness the event, and once the event has hit, they're allowed to get another quarter to start over again because the game you have to manually reset the game and get back to it. Now, interesting enough, and this is where Ghosts and Goblins and Ghouls and Ghosts and games like that sort of came into play. Rather, from Ghouls and Ghosts or Ghosts and Goblins specifically, which is the original arcade title, and not the Ghouls and Ghosts that we did the episode for. That game was actually designed to not have a difficulty spike. It was designed with the intention that a person could still get through the whole thing from repeated knowledge. Everything that happens in the game will always happen every single time, and so you can get to the end of this game. That's why sometimes Ghouls and Ghosts get the moniker of the first Soulsborne game of the arcade.
Yep. That would be pretty accurate to that too, because I mean, a lot of it is that and this is where more of my specialty will come into this as well, is because when we did the playthrough, obviously, as you guys have witnessed with the YouTube channel with Super Ghouls and Ghosts, me being the pilot of that game, a lot of that is familiarity. The reason why I was able to get through most of that is because it's all patterns. It's always going to be patterns. Your Soulsborne games are no different than that too. But the reason why these games had those difficulties was because every enemy had a different pattern to it, from the zombies to the amaranths, the red devils that flew around. And obviously, how you approach those were a player specific choice too. So, but I mean, that's where you would talk about that. It's like, what weapon works the best compared to which enemy that you are fighting. Obviously, you're going to have the zombies who go down one hit, so any weapon's great for that. But then when you get to the guys who dive bomb you, who drop to the ground and rush you and stuff like that, and they don't go down in one hit, that's where the difficulty comes in. It's because that's a pattern, and that's exactly what you're talking about right there, Leo, too. And Ghosts and Goblins was the one that was pretty much king of this sort of stuff, because it was the whole point behind it, was to make something that wasn't just a game that, while it did loop, and in the arcade it really looped, there was never a kill screen for it. It was just keep going until you basically died. And for most people, that was probably before you even made it to the first boss, the Cyclops. But it's all pattern based. So
now they do an extension to that. That's not the first game to ever have something like that, where it's pattern based, and it's if you track back some of the older games on there, which is interesting because some of these older, more difficult games tend to have a lot more effects and specialties added to them. Like, for example, Dragon's Lair is one of those games. Its graphics, especially in 1982, amazing because it's a live action cartoon that you're doing. Arguably super hard though, because you have to know exactly where a position is, and I think, and it can be kind of janky on how accurate it is when it hits one thing, or when you select an action for it. But if you know all the actions on it, then you'll be able to get through the game. What's interesting in that is there's a point in Dragon's Lair where it loops itself and mirrors itself. So you will enter one room that happens to look like so the only 3 rooms in the entire game that you will actually, that is always played once and you never go back to, is the entrance of the castle. Then there's the fight with the Lizard King, and then the final fight at the end with the dragon. Those 3 instances are always there, but outside of that, it'll randomize what rooms start popping up. and in whether or not one room will be facing left or facing right, because one will be a mirror of each other.
So kind of like an early procedural generation.
Correct.
Yep.
That actually leads into a little bit of our engagement types. I mentioned before in design analysis, but your engagement type is basically what makes this game fun. There's a bunch of different types, but the primary one that we're talking about is challenge. It's more engaging, it's more fun to overcome a difficult challenge than it is to overcome an easy challenge. It means more to say, I beat ghosts and goblins than it means to say, I beat, I don't know, My Little Pony's Adventure or something like that.
Hey, Crystal Pony's Tale is a rough one, man.
But even within this category of challenge, there's a lot of subcategories, things that, what makes one game challenging can be very different from what makes another game challenging. When we're talking about Ghosts and Goblins, we're talking about practice. You get better at this by seeing the patterns and memorizing them
Yep.
and then remembering them as you go along. With something like Dragon's Lair, though, it's a little bit more about improvisation. It still helps to know and memorize all the patterns of the room, but since you don't know which one's coming up next, you need to be flexible. Really, if you want to be good at Dragon's Lair, it's more about your ability to adapt to a new scenario than it is to remember how previous scenarios played out.
Right, because it's not going to be the same scenario each time because the rooms will randomize.
Correct. And I mean, if they flip around, like some of those rooms did do, like literally almost, if I remember correctly, second half of the castle always goes and mirrors itself, and that's when you start seeing the random generalization. What you both are talking about with Dragon's Lair. But sorry, Robin, I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead, buddy.
That's fine. So something that appeals to one player might not appeal to another. Ghosts and ghouls, there are a lot of people who really like experiencing that same thing and getting really good at doing that same thing over and over again. And there's a lot of people that really don't like that, but they love having to adapt to something new. And so even though these are both very challenging games, they approach it from very different aspects.
Oh yeah. Um, an interesting one that people don't think of. So Sega did their own version of a quick time event game like Dragon's Lair did, except in the arcade because they could pour more money into this. Since they're with different games that they were designing, they designed a game called Time Traveler. Now, very few people nowadays may have ever experienced it, but if you do, it's kind of a weird one-off thing. But essentially, you would not only do you have patterns on it, it's a completely holographic game. So by that means there's no real screen. It bends light so that way you can see your imaging, which became a problem in the arcade because those are dark and dank caves in some cases. So
Yeah.
if you were standing slightly off of the position, you can't see anything, even though it's a 3D image. Meanwhile, a person on the other side is seeing it flip because they're seeing just the images built by lasers for it out. Looks super cool, but that's its own set of jankiness.
God, you had to bring that one up. That's a game I actually forgot about.
Yeah, that's but it's interesting to think about it because the game is designed with less stuff in it, but to be just as hard as Dragon's Lair, they decided to instead put the effort into graphical upgrades. It's a holographic game system built in the early 90s when holograms from light sources is still basically science fiction.
Now, did they use prisms to to create the hologram on the screen for you, or not on the screen, I should say, but to project it in a way that you can see it?
Basically, a black screen that you would have in there, and what they would do is reflect the light
Okay,
from using small prism lasers to the screen, and so it built it as if there was a screenless system.
gotcha. All right.
Like we have something similar like that right now. You don't see it very often, but that has to deal with mass production. It's just expensive to make something like that.
Yeah.
But they had it then. It's kind of like 3D movies now. They had 3D movies back in the 50s. It's just we don't do it very often anymore, as the technology isn't the same as it is now.
Shark Boy and Lava Girl much?
Hey, man.
Well, it's more expensive to do, and for a lot of people, there's not a huge payoff.
Right.
Some people play games because the cool graphics, but that's not a huge selection of people, especially in, the early 90s, late 80s. If you wanted to experience cool visuals, you're not going to an arcade. You're going to the movie theater.
Hmm. Yeah, so this is how the hard difficulty of games spike around with the arcades. Now, from the arcades, we move on to, before we get to consoles, we actually go into home computer games at the time. Some of them are tough just by in its nature. Like, surprisingly, a lot of people have died off in Oregon Trail because we all had dysentery somehow. Um,
Screw you, Terry. Hey, fuck you,
Or you're
man.
dissing Terry.
yeah, man, that guy just died dissing Terry.
Right.
But there's other things in the 80s and going on to the 90s. There was a rise of a games genre, the point-click adventure game, or your basic adventure game. Now, in some cases, there was, again, just like in the arcade, oversight and problems with it because, but that just happened. For example, a big one was the company Sierra. Sierra was notorious for designing games in a way that they had an unwinnable scenario. And some of those were just brutal. King's Quest, one of the earlier King's Quests is.
I'm gonna say King's Quest is one I was trying to think of. I was trying to think of the title for it, but yeah.
Yeah, King's Quest, Space Quest.
Oh shoot, Space Quest, man.
Yeah, the intergalactic janitor of doom is basically what you were.
Space Quest was kind of it sucked because Space Quest actually had 1,000 different ways you could die in Space Quest, and so you can make, and they just kept that trend going too. A almost notorious one is the old DOS Hitchhiker's Guide text game.
Yes.
Because, so for those who haven't played that, which is a large portion of us, even I haven't played it, but I know of it.
Oh, yep.
The way that the game works is towards the beginning of the game, it follows this, similar things that happen in the book, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. One of the things that happens at the beginning is Earth gets destroyed.
Not Earth. I live there. Shit.
Pretty much, yeah.
So the thing is that you get abducted by the Volgards to their ship. You have a small amount of time, and this is a text-based game. You have a small amount of time to type out and go through your house to recover 10 specific items. If you miss one of those items at the end of the game, Marvin, the robot, will ask you to help him fix the ship, and he will ask you for specifically the one item you did not pick up. And that's not as bad as saying the Babelfish puzzle, which was so notorious at the time that there used to be was a company that printed out shirts that said, "Yes, I beat the Babelfish puzzle."
That's awesome.
Well, and part of this, I think, part of it's just, from programming limitations, especially with Sierra. We're entering into a new game type where players are allowed to do anything that they can type. That's, a big deal. And there's a lot of things that players can do. And so you're maybe not thinking super hard about how, if they do action A, how it might interrupt their ability to do action B later. And part of that's just, because there's too many things to keep track of. But in the case of Hitchhiker's Guide, where they are specifically programming it to screw you over because you didn't get this one item, that's an attempt at difficulty in what is ultimately a narrative game. People aren't playing Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy because they're expecting a great challenge. They're doing it because it was a funny book, and they want to relive that funny book and play it themselves. But the design aspects, the design principles for narrative games weren't really in place yet. People didn't fully know what they were doing, and so it's like, this is how you make video games: is you make them hard. That's what makes it a video game, is the challenge. And this is kind of where we're starting to learn that actually, no, that's not what makes this game fun.
So Sierra makes a bunch of these games, and they're all designed with different unwinnable scenarios. There's another company, Infocom, which also makes a bunch of these. They made the Hitchhiker's Guide Zork games, which are notoriously tough.
Oh yeah, Zork. I do remember Zork.
Oh,
yeah.
I have some nightmares about Zork.
I think anybody who's been alive as long as we have been should have nightmares
Yeah.
about Zork, where that should just be pretty much like, yeah, you hear Zork and people are going to be in the corner cowering, crying, and just rocking themselves back themselves.
You can 100% play Zork on the Xbox 360.
I don't want to.
Well, because Black Ops 2 has a in the secret break off thing where you can get out of the chair, there's a computer that has a full functional playable version of Zork, and you can play the whole thing.
Again, one of those things, because like, and I'll tell you this too, because I'm a sadistic person. Because I mean, obviously, I enjoy playing games like Ghosts and Goblins. I'm very sadistic in nature, but or is that masochistic? One or the other.
No, it's sadistic. Masochistic is if you
It's
no
sadistic.
sadistic is if you enjoy others' pain. Masochistic is if you enjoy your own.
So it'd be masochistic at that point. I mean, don't get me wrong. I do enjoy watching you guys suffer when you try to play a game that I know I could beat. And then it's at the same time, it's also kind of masochistic to me though too, because I'm just like, I want to help you out so badly. I just want to tell you what to do, but I know if I do, you're just not going to enjoy the punishment that's coming your way. And
neither will you.
Exactly. And at the end of the day, neither of us are a winner, and that's how I feel about that. But I mean, yeah, because I remember that though too. It's like as a person who played Zork, and I never really beat Zork, but when I remember when they put that in Black Ops 2, and I got up and I did the whole thing for that. I was like, oh wait, Zork's in this. All right, let me go check that out. And then I think I found myself enjoying Zork a little bit more than I did the multiplayer of Black Ops 2, and that's saying something because Black Ops 2 multiplayer is pretty good.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
But Zork is Zork, and while I enjoy suffering, and I do, it's like, do I enjoy getting like suffering because somebody knifed me, or do I enjoy suffering because I'm trying to play through Zork?
Oh man. But yeah, so Zork is another big one on it. Hope on the horizon for anybody who wants to do that. So at some point, LucasArts, the game company that's designed around George Lucas's franchise, you might have heard of it, called the Star Wars. A division, and this is a thing. Back in the 80s, some companies would start having their own video game department just to make games for their own merchandise. And mostly that's merchandising things. We'll get into more of that in a much later episode about the funny story about merchandising and things for video games. It's a planned episode for it. But what happens is that LucasArts came with the decision that the game should never be unbeatable. And so every scenario that they had was always a way that you could still beat the game regardless of even if you screw yourself over. Now, to this effect, they make a revolutionary system to make it easier for every point-click adventure game going forward, called the SCUM system. Now, it's called SCUM because it's short for System Created for Use of Maniac Mansion, because the game Maniac Mansion comes out, and Maniac Mansion does not, they remove the typing option that most adventure games had back in the 80s. So, because they took that away, every command that you will ever use in the game is there. And it allowed them to play with other things within the programming, too. So, it's one of the earliest games that has multiple endings because of this. And because in Maniac Mansion, you get to pick one, you have to go classic 80s movie. There's a mad scientist has kidnapped the main hero's girlfriend, and you have to save him with two of your friends. But depending on which two people that you pick, ultimately decides on which endings that you have possible, and that's key. Possible, not final. So because you pick one character, that doesn't mean you're locked out of never being able to beat the game if something happens, because there is a way to kill off your characters in that game.
There's actually, at least on the NES version, there's really only one way that you can actually die in the game.
I gotta say, a way? There's a lot of ways.
Several, actually.
If I'm remembering right, it was, and it's only in some versions, because they snuck in a means of stealing one of the mansion inhabitants' pet hamsters and sticking it in the microwave and then presenting the exploded remains to him, and then he just offs you on sight. Yet Nintendo was pissed about that.
And the thing was that they didn't know about it because they just did it as a port. The original game has that in there. That's just one thing you can do. There's multiple ways that you can get yourself killed. There is, that's one of them. Killing the pet hamster of the crazed paramilitary guy who lives upstairs and giving his remains back. Number two, which is just a dick move. Number two is going to the so they have a nuclear reactor built in their mansion, somewhat poorly put together. And so the coolant system is the to keep the reactor cold is they're pumping water from the pool. At some point in the game, you actually have to drain the pool to get because there's a key stuck at the bottom of it. But if you go in there, you can kill off one of your members by going in there, leaving leaving one of your heroes there, switching to the other hero, and turning the water back on so it drowns him.
Such a dick move.
A third option is to take it's an item in the game that's that's just a glass jar which you can fill with different liquids. One of the liquids is the now radioactive water that's in that pool and just drink it yourself. And the other option, if you just want to find a way to kill everybody, is you drain the pool and you leave. That's it. After so much time, the whole place melts down. But yeah, so like the thing is that even if you get one of your nurses killed, you're not locked out. There is a way to beat the game with the remaining resources that you have. It's harder, and arguably there's a character in the game called Jeff, which is useless to you because when I beat the game, I had Jeff in my party, and Jeff. Each of the people that you can pick in your party have a special skill set. Jeff has the least special skill set possible. He has one thing that makes him different than everybody else, which is to fix a phone. And two other characters can do that already.
It's like, why even at that point?
But yeah, so the thing is that was the LucasArts philosophy. Game was made by LucasArts. It was to make this adventure game so it was always had a beatable option. Another option with that is Monkey Island series. There isn't a way to really lose lethally in a Monkey Island game. It'll take time. I mean, what? Guybrush Threepwood can hold his breath for 17, or I think it's 17 minutes.
10 minutes.
For 10 minutes.
I think only one game actually takes that literally.
Mhm.
Every other game, you can be underwater for 30 minutes and show no ill effects.
Yeah, because I think you can literally just be down there indefinitely.
You just chill down there. So sometimes certain games that were coming around for computer games at this time, though had some, let's just call it errors in programming, which have become kind of legendary. The two biggest ones that I know of. The first one is the original 1990 XCOM that came out for DOS systems originally. So when that game came out, it was released, and it got this notoriety of being a really hard game, and it is. So that's actually one of the games that is super difficult, and I love. And if you were to ask me, hey Leo, should I play this XCOM game? I will tell you no, because that is really hard. Go for the newer versions that come out 10 to 15 years later for the Xbox and the PC. Then that's a much better game to get into. But this XCOM game was hard. And now, as it turns out, there was a bug in the programming. And what it did is it flipped all the menu, the difficulty select options. So when you were selecting the easiest difficulty, you were in reality selecting the hardest difficulty.
Yep.
Oh.
And it's kind of funny that you mentioned that too, because I mean, there's a lot of people that have played XCOM that have said on the easiest difficulty could never beat it because of that, because that was never known.
But so here's where XCOM takes the for it. So their games are now that come out because it has several sequels before you get to the newer ones, and even then they're still really tough, really difficult games. But now it just built a notoriety of being hard, and so now people who want the hard challenge are leaning to going to XCOM instead of other games.
Yep.
And it sounds brutal, but it is fun. Although you get some wacky stuff where like your soldier has to fire a shot and you watch it go into a barn 3 blocks down, it hits a gas tank. The enemy's 2 feet from him. He misses that badly.
98% accuracy, more like 2% accuracy.
Yeah, and that happens 5 times in a row, so you're questioning your own will to live at this rate.
Yeah, and XCOM was definitely
Mhm.
notorious for stuff like that too. Because again, like I just said, 90% accuracy. Really, it's more like 2% accuracy. Guy could be right there.
It's really, it's not an accurate measure of how accurate your firing is. It's how certain your soldier is that they
That
can make
too.
the shot, which really has nothing to do with
Nope.
their skill.
It has to do with their confidence. Oh, looks like Billy Bob's really confident. Yeah, he's got a 70% chance to hit that killer. Nope, looks like Billy Bob has missed horribly.
He's so confident he stuck the barrel in the enemy's face, right down his face hole. But no, he misses.
People didn't like Steve was right. People did not complain that that there was an error at first. They just assumed that's just how hard the game was.
Man, if this is easy mode, I wonder what difficult is like.
When you also have to factor in though too at the time that XCOM came out as well. I mean, you didn't have forums like you do in this day and age. You didn't have stuff like that also helped identify like, hey, this is a known bug. So like most of these games that got released as they were. There was no day one patch to fix the fucking difficulty because they fucked up. There was none of that. And I mean, it's like in this day and age, we when your new game comes out, you're always going to get a day one patch to help correct what they realized was a fuck up in development. But I mean, back in that day and age, when it got released, it got released. That was it. You got it as it was.
Yeah, when a game went gold, that meant that's the game.
Yep.
Now, when a game goes gold, it means, well, be ready for a day 0 patch that is half the size of the disc.
Yeah, that's also true, yeah.
Another programming error that's just ended up in the notoriety, which I think is funny because they know about it and they just ran with it, is Civilization. Sid Meier's Civilization.
Okay, I just realized which one this is.
Yep, Gandhi.
Mutually assured destruction.
Yeah. I think on this one though too, we should let Rob explain his story about his experience with Gandhi too, because I feel like that would be really appropriate for this particular conversation.
And I feel like my story's probably pretty universal for people who have played Civilization. But you know, playing Civilization, the very first one, because I'm old, and Gandhi. It's late in the game. Most civilizations have developed a lot of higher tech stuff, and Gandhi approaches me and says, "Hey, we've got nukes, so you're going to give us a bunch of money so we don't nuke you." And my immediate reaction is, "You're Gandhi. You're not going to nuke me. No, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my entire life. Screw you. I'm not giving you one red penny." And Gandhi is many things, but he's not a liar. And he nuked 2 of my cities that turn.
Same turn.
Totally laid waste to me, and you better believe I started paying Gandhi after that.
And
so,
well, I was gonna say, cause like, so the reason why, and a lot of people like who are listening to this podcast here are probably going like, yeah, we know the situation, but for those who have never played Civilization, and I mean, I'm gonna kind of steal your thunder on this one here, Leo, just because you did a lot of explaining.
Yeah, you're going where I'm going at.
The reason behind this was the difficulty of the game. Every historical figure had a set difficulty, with Gandhi being set at the lowest is what it was. So by the time that as the game advances, new weaponry comes out, new discoveries comes out, it always continues to lower the difficulty of the characters that you're going against. Well, being Gandhi was at the lowest. The moment that nukes became a thing, Gandhi went from 0 to 10. And it's because the counter reversed itself because it couldn't go past 0. So what did it do? It went exactly. It did the negative factor, and then it treated it as -1 was actually 10. So Gandhi then becomes the most aggressive son of a bitch in the entire game to come after you. And if he's got the nukes, you're paying, like what Rob had to do. So you have to keep that in mind too. And the funniest part about all this is that the developers realized this. And instead of correcting this for future games, they thought it was the funniest thing in the world that Gandhi is this just hyper-aggressive asshole with nukes, that they decided to make Gandhi a hyper-aggressive asshole with nukes. So it's a trend that just kept going.
So what they did was that, and it's not difficulty, it's aggressiveness. They have an aggressive
that's what
level.
It was.
And then
the aggressiveness.
Once you hit, I think, roughly about in the 1800s or such, once you get certain sciences, it pushes everyone up by a certain number. But Gandhi's will loop into a negative number, thus making him showing up as the most aggressive guy out there. So he's got no chill.
Yep.
You just but the thing is that Steve's right though. Difficulty does play into a factor. Anyone who's played a Civilization game knows that you can set the difficulty higher, and it makes it rougher for you. It doesn't necessarily make Gandhi any easier, and he is more likely to beat you up now.
Gandhi becomes the biggest warlord.
In that particular case, it's more a matter of stat adjustments as the game progresses, more so than real difficulty.
But yeah,
because doesn't difficulty in that affect the like the minerals and stuff that you collect, that kind of thing?
Correct. Yes, it does. The higher the difficulty, the less minerals you get your hands on. So you have to have better resource management.
So yes, it does that, but also it's how that the AIs will compete against you. So they're more likely. Yeah. So what happens is that they're more likely to fight you, or they're more likely to work behind your back, or to make certain allies against you.
Oh, that two-faced son of a bitch!
I've been played before. I played a game of Civilization, and I got played to the point of me being the guy who's trying to conquer the world, and all I did was help this other person out, and these other guys out. Turns out they were using my army to take everyone else out. It was horrible.
Like, I just gave him a banana.
What happened here? When did I become the bad guy? I look over, and the entire nation the entire nation of England decided to pull the old 1600s trick, and now has colonies all over the world because I wasn't paying attention. Oh, so we go from the computer games, and we move on to other games, which is consoles is the next big leap. And consoles tend to have a whole different history, especially when it comes to the two biggest game designers at this time, nation-wise, Japan, and their big contributions with Nintendo and the Super NES and other game development companies in there like Square and Konami. But then you also have on the flip side the United States as well, with their game developers that have been coming out. It's software and I'm trying to think of an Interplay and various other ones like that. So they tend to have different ways of developing. And now one big thing on this, and this has to be mentioned, in the 1980s there was a moment that was called the Great Video Game Crash. At that time, and that was specifically to the United States, but the United States is one of the biggest game developing countries in the world at this time. The video game crash basically was an economic crash in video game design because there was, as we kind of pointed out, no quality control, no QA. If a game was broken when you got it, tough. Other consoles such as the Atari had a lot of janky games. Some games, like E.T. came out, and that thing has the notoriety all on its own.
Well, and E.T. was one that basically contributed to the video game crash at that point too, especially because right when that one came out, they mass produced this game that was janky as all fuck.
I feel bad for the developer of that though, the game designer who had to do that, because essentially he had, what is it, 5 to 6 months to pump out a game, a fully functional notoriety game, at the same while being stalled out because of negotiations in order to use the rights to use ET. And so by the time they got to the development process, he's running out of time. And this is back in the day of single to 1 to 2.
Very small teams. Very, very small.
So, about ET, would you like to know how much time he actually had to make that game?
I think it was less than 5 to 6 months. I thought it was like 6 weeks.
It was 5 weeks.
Yeah, something like that. It was it was super small.
And to make matters even worse on that, it was the first time that the publishers, let alone the developers, had guaranteed sales to Spielberg. Guaranteed numbers that they would sell of this game. Yeah. The developers were absolutely pissed. It's like, you are giving us 0 lead time for this, let alone for because they wanted it out by Christmas. And it's like, okay, so in order for us to be able to do this, mind you, because yes, they had about 5 to 6 months from signing, you had to factor in things like marketing, mass production, and shipping, which were nowhere near as fast or efficient as they are today. So he had to get that stuff done fast to be able to do the marketing, to be able to do the manufacturing and the delivery of all these items. So this guy, I don't remember what his name was.
It's Howard Scott Warshaw.
Okay, yeah. So I've read a book on this, actually, and that's why I'm as familiar with this as I am, because I've read it multiple times, and it's hilarious. Just to read about how polarizing some of these stories in the industry are, depending on who you ask. Because Nolan Bushnell of Atari comes off, like, when he talks about things, he talks about it in very, layman's kind of way, very down to earth kind of way. But then when you talk to literally, like, you hear the interviews with everybody else, Nolan was a fucking asshole to everybody. So it's like, this is just so different. No matter who you ask, it is a different story. But this is the pretty concise story of, no, we were screwed here from the beginning.
And I think it developed. It fell in his hands because Howard also developed a game called Yar's Revenge, and for game historians, Yar's Revenge is the most popular and successful game of the Atari 2600. So this is you got to feel bad for Howard Scott Warshaw for both having created the greatest game of the Atari and considered the worst game of the Atari. Although he can hold over his head, once almost crashed an entire economic system single-handedly. You're welcome.
Right. And then end up having your stuff buried somewhere in a desert.
Yeah, and the worst part is it wasn't even all Atari's fault. Or not Atari, excuse me,
No.
ET's fault. It just gets pinned on ET because it was the final straw. Like, you can see that there was a decline coming already. I mean, it was a buildup. It's just ET was such a massive, like, push for something that was ultimately just going to fail anyway. But it was such a big push with so many thousands of copies being put out in the market all at once. And it's just like, well, you killed it yourself, guys.
Yeah. And that's basically the truth of it. When you mass produce something like that and then you completely undersell it, like the way it did, there's no recovery. Straight up, there's just no recovery, and that's just how it comes down to.
Yeah.
So.
Now, there, luckily for our sakes, there was a recovery process, but it's not the way as most people think. So what happens is that after a couple of years, Nintendo comes out and they want to make a game console, and they do as much to say, yes, we're making not video games. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. So they're like, this is an entertainment system, which is why it's titled the NES, Nintendo Entertainment System, to avoid it being associated from video games. Now,
it's also why it looks like a toaster oven.
So, but with that, they also introduce things that they don't normally do. There's a quality control. There is acceptable release timeframes. So they change around the gaming industry to fit this, but that's because of the crash. Dealt with some other restrictions that a lot of people didn't agree on. One of the things is that if you were a game developer in the United States, you are limited to how many games you could output per year. So, upside is that's one of the reasons why you have more time to work on a game. Downside is you can only make one or two, I think it is.
The total number per year was 6 titles, and that was per publication company. So they would companies started circumventing this by acquiring other publications. Like LJN was a publication that was purchased by another company. Ultra Games was a subsidiary of Konami, so they were able to get additional product out each year that way. It was a big fight with a lot of companies at this time, which is really unfortunate, but totally understandable because you don't really want to push your luck when you're pulling yourself literally out of the ground.
Yeah, and you had to mention the devil's name of video game publishers back then in the Nintendo era too, LJN, laughing, joking numbnuts, as they have been amply dubbed by the internet, thanks to the angry video game nerd. Credit to James on that one. But yeah, I mean, you talk about that right there too, because that's basically what it was. Because if you think about it, you look at the biggest library on the Nintendo, it actually is LJN. I think they have something like over 40 games that was on the Nintendo.
For one publisher, yeah.
Yeah, on the Nintendo alone. Just the NES, not the Super NES, not the Sega Genesis, nothing else. Just the NES. It's actually one of the biggest libraries because of what they did. They kept basically publishing these titles that had almost no quality control to them to begin with, which is why most of the games that got released were bad. Is the best way to put that. Bad. I mean, granted, not all of them were bad, though, too. It's like we can't say that LGN did nothing but produce, like, a giant shit pile of games, because that's not what they did. I mean, they were the publishers, sure, but a lot of it does still fall back onto the developers. Then they had to meet their deadlines as well. Because, again, like, we talk about this, and you made a very interesting point, like, we're talking about the time frame and, like, the handling and stuff like that. It's all political bullshit when it gets right down to it. It's always politics that get involved and mess it up when it gets right into it. And I'm not talking like government or anything like that. I'm talking literally just like, person A, person B, person C, the expectations are set, and then somebody's not on the same page, and it's always a swerve and making it worse. And then you have the history of LGN as a result. Like, you look at that, and that is, I mean, it's exactly what it is. Your games are difficult because they didn't have time to actually do the quality control. And because LJN would be like, we're going to give you XYZ amount of money. You need to finish this game within this set amount of time. And half the time, it was never enough time to give them the quality control, to make sure that the controls were good, make sure the gameplay was fair, and make sure that there wasn't any freaking jank with the graphics, which a lot of those LJN games had jank with graphics.
Now, then the reasons why, and that's one of the reasons why a lot of people, especially for Nintendo back then, would lean towards Nintendo-made games. Zelda, Mario,
Yep.
and that's because they put all the effort into the quality control for it. And their tech. They do some interesting stuff with our stuff back then. Now, when we get into that, though, there's also an economic practice that happens in the U.S. that doesn't really happen in other parts of the world. And I think, Ben, you understand more about that one more than I do. It's Japan has no rental system.
They didn't at the time. Rentals were actually illegal for the longest time in Japan. So the idea of it was very foreign to the developers. And you ran into an issue of them trying to compensate or balance that to encourage the sales of their product instead of allowing the rentals to happen. And because of that, you would run into games where they would actually, for the American releases, adjust the difficulty up, making it more difficult to play it and finish it in the time frame a rental would allow, thus encouraging you to go out and just buy the game to have unlimited time with it. The one that I'm most familiar with is the first Resident Evil game, even on the PlayStation 1, is significantly more playable and easy on the Japanese release. Part of it is obviously ammo. Ink ribbons are, they're all very different amounts available to you in the game. But also a control scheme is straight up absent altogether in the American release. The primary the default in Japan actually on the PS1 was the auto lock aiming system, where when you would pull up your gun, if there was an enemy near, it would automatically turn you towards them and target them. Completely absent in the American version of the first game. They introduced it in the second game as the third control type?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was the third control type in Resident Evil 2.
I mean, just as a prime example of them trying really, really hard to make sure you bought the game instead of rented the game. Because they thought it would hurt the sales, and they're not wrong.
There was an old SNES game. I can't remember what it is, but it was an old beat 'em up that I played when I was younger. And there was a secret code, kind of like the Konami code that you'd put in, up, down, down, left, right. When you put in this code for it, it flipped the game from its US release to the Japanese release. And when it did that, certain stages were shorter. Some of the areas had smaller enemies or less enemies for it. There's a stage in it that's in the sewer. In the US version, it's a puzzle that you have to figure out how to navigate your way through there while you're in the timed section. In the Japanese version, it's a straightaway, like any typical beat 'em up style game.
Okay, this is a beat 'em up you're
Yeah, this
talking
is a
about.
beat 'em up style game. So like Final Fight, Castle Crashers,
Right,
styles.
right. And there's a puzzle
Yeah, it's
in a sewer
yeah,
level.
yeah. The puzzle levels are kind of like when it comes up a lot in Zelda games where there's the forest stage that you're in. You go from one entrance to it, and it'll lead you to another entrance. And you have to figure out the right pattern to get through that. Well, in order to exit, this is the second stage, and it's already a tough game. It's actually, and the enemies have more health in the U.S. version than they did in the Japanese version.
Fuck that noise. That's all I've got on that. No, I'm sorry. Stage 2?
I think I know what game that is you're talking about too. I think that was Sonic Blast, man, because that was one of the.
No, not.
If
Well,
it,
it's a different one. I'll see if I can
yeah,
find
see if
it.
you can find someone that. Shoot that to me later. Obviously, because we're obviously in the middle of the podcast right now too. So I mean, but definitely
Yeah.
shoot that to me later because I'm curious to check that one out.
I will. I could probably find it again. But yeah, so this is a whole economic system that one nation is doing that the other nation is not.
And we're talking a little bit about, they're doing this on purpose, but the type of challenges that they're introducing aren't the engaging type of challenges.
Nah, 4chan
It's
wasn't
no
a thing yet.
fun to get screwed over by the computer. It's no fun when you fail because your control scheme is messed up. But as we're talking about, this was early days. There wasn't really an internet. There wasn't a way to like compare and contrast. You lived in America, you weren't going to get the Japanese version of the game. You'd have to jump through all sorts of hoops to get that. When you've got, you can just go buy one at the store down the street. Why would you bother getting the Japanese version imported over? That's dumb. Nobody does that. And so nobody knows that there's this disparity between, between your control screens, between the difficulties. You can't get away with that now. Now that we do live in an age of the internet, but even so, there are a lot of people who think I want, the engagement of my game is challenge. I need to make it challenging. And the way to do that is with janky controls.
And then see, to me, that's just like when you make it like that way. That's what I like to call an artificial challenge, where it's not organic. It's not something that was designed this way because you have its memory patterns or anything like that. It's because you're literally fighting against bad control design. And in my opinion, it's like, and the hardest thing to kind of talk about that too is like, you ever watch like somebody do a playthrough of a game that you're very interested in? They talk about, oh, it's very difficult, but then you start to look at this like, well, how's this game difficult? Because it's like this guy's just whomping on it, and the thing that people don't understand is that you can't see the hardware side of it, which is making it difficult because you're watching a video. This person who's playing it's already adjusted to the shit factor of the control. And that's literally what it is. It's like there are some games. I remember NES games back in the day that had half-second delays when you tried to hit something. It's like Castlevania is a great one. Castlevania is a fantastic one.
It has a half-second delay every single button press.
It's while it did have tight controls for the most part, though, a lot of your attacks were half-second delays. But I'm also talking like there's a couple of games too, and it's like kind of jumping back to LJN on this one too, and saying that. But there you had a couple of games that get released where it's like tapping the controller to have your character inch forward, non-existent. You literally have to hold that damn thing down to get this thing to move faster than a freaking tank, and you can get out and push it faster than a tank could. Yeah. And that's kind of like like what Rob's talking about there. That's a great example of that. When the game's intentionally designed that way, especially in today's day and age, it's not a fun experience. Like I have quit. Like I'm a bigger fan of like the Metroidvania style gameplays. I'm a bigger fan of the side scrolling beat 'em ups than I am like the first person shooters. While I do enjoy good first person shooters and I do enjoy good RPGs, I will always find my bread and butter be in the side scrolling games. And if I find that the controller is absolute shit in a side scroller game in today's day and age, I'll hands up drop it. I won't play it anymore because it's just, to me, I don't have time to deal with somebody who decided I'm going to make this game more difficult by putting an artificial challenge by making the controller not be responsive. And I like to think that most people don't do that, but like what Rob said, it does happen.
Yeah, and I don't think it's not always an intentional we're going to screw over players. It's program your controls is hard.
I believe it.
Getting them to work just right is hard, and a delay between when you press a button and when something happens on screen. I mean, ordinarily you think of that, that should be instantaneous. There should be minimal possible delay, but there are reasons why you might want to have a small delay in there. And it's sometimes difficult to get that right while you're developing a game. Um,
Yep.
and of course, bad controls very rarely, but very notably, sometimes are the fun of the game. Octodad comes to mind.
I am Brad.
The whole point of the game is that you have crappy controls and you have to do these mundane, simple tasks with them.
But it's the other one, QWERTY, I think is what it is.
Quap.
QWOP, lads.
But you see, in that situation though, too, like when that is the intention behind the game, and that's the funny part about it. Like the developers has the idea of like, let's develop this game that has newer age graphics, newer age but it's the fun factor isn't the game itself. It's the fact that you have to fight these bad controls to have these simple tasks be done. You want to make bread. Well, good luck making bread with bad fucking controls, because that's the whole point of the game. And that's one of those things where like that's acceptable, because those are, as they have been labeled, rage games.
I have never heard that term before. Oh my god.
Like Getting Over It with Bennett Foddy. That's a great example of a rage game where the control, like the whole objective is to get this guy in a freaking I forget,
Cauldron.
Cauldron, thank you. Using a sledgehammer to get himself around the map.
Not even a pickaxe, a sledgehammer.
And the controls are intentionally designed to be bad.
It's less about the controls and more about it being a physics-based experience, I think, with those, though,
Yeah, so it's like you have to think about it that way too. It's like, again, that's that bad control design where it's like you would think that, oh, that's not too hard, that should be easy to do. No, it's fucking designed to make you rage, and that's why these particular type of games. I am bread, or I think I am toast. I can't remember the name of that one is, but
I am bread, I must become toast.
Yeah, I am bread, I must become toast. Yep. You have that. You have Octodad. You have Getting Over It. Like and it's its own genre. People love to play these games because they love getting fucking angry, and I don't understand it. It's not for me. I want when I want my games to make me mad, I'll play Ghosts and Goblins, and you have seen it with the videos on Gaming Theater. I eventually start tilting because it starts pissing me off, but I'll get through it because I still like the game. But when I don't submerge myself into these sort of things, and I don't know any of my friends who do, and if you guys do, you guys need to seek some help. That's all I'm going to tell you right now.
There is no help for me, man.
There's no help, although Steam has a discount I could use right about now.
Ooh,
and I hate myself.
Let me just crack these knuckles.
And I think it really has to do a lot with you walk into Getting Over It knowing that the controls are the challenge. You understand when you pick up that controller that this is where the challenge comes from. It's
exactly.
not necessarily that you have to do this, like you're not trying to do it under a time limit. It's not necessarily that the map itself is weirdly difficult. You go in there understanding that mastering the controls is the challenge you are trying to overcome. When you go into like Dark Souls, you're not expecting your controls to be the difficult part.
So it sort of brings up to the next point. At a certain point in time, there's been changes through consoles and other games at that point to make a change. A big one that happened in the early 2000s was the introduction of dynamic difficulty. The game adjusting its difficulty to make itself easier or harder as it goes. And one of the earlier ones of that was Crash Bandicoot. And the designers wanted to do that so that way it would be, if the game was too hard for a player, they would make the game easier without you feeling that the game is making it easier. There's other games that try to do certain things like that as well. There were some early Capcom games. I want to say it's Onimusha who does that. There was one where after you failed so many times, it would give you the option to select it to an easier difficulty. Granted, to me that felt like a jab at my skill level, sir.
Oh yeah, no, that's a backhand moment.
That's a backhand moment. You wanna ease this down a notch.
And so it's not the only time Capcom's done it either. I just want to quickly jump into Resident Evil 4. There's a room that's got a couple of water ponds in it, and there's a bunch of enemies with the spiked shields. And then there's a couple enemies up high and off center that have crossbows. In the original build of the game, if you die 3 times to that room, the 4th time you come in, those crossbow guys are not there.
Yep, it does actually remove them. I do remember that. Yeah,
And that's automatic. And it's dropped down to a single death on all the modern ports.
But that's what dynamic difficulty is. It's just a big one that did stuff like that was Left 4 Dead, and when that game came out with the director,
the AI director is amazing.
another one too that actually had a pretty good AI director in it as well. That actually was before Left 4 Dead, if I remember correctly, was F.E.A.R. Because the AI in F.E.A.R was also really good to go with as well. That one actually did know how to adjust itself on the fly to make the enemies seem more competent while still having the same amount of health and whatnot. Like, and I kind of use an example in this one too, when I talk about this, where it's like our good friend Kyle, Kai, I can never pronounce his name, Kibai.
Kibai.
Yeah, Kibai. But in any case, though, like when I was playing F.E.A.R at his place and we were going through this, we made a comment about how it's like, you know, it's like we were talking about the game's AI was supposed to be revolutionary, and we didn't feel like it was being revolutionary at the time. And that's the perfect open foot insert mouth open foot insert mouth situation type right there, where I'm commenting about how the AI is not that great. And then the next thing I know, my ass got flanked by the AI because I was focusing on the guy in front of me. I didn't see his buddy actually jump through the window of the office to go around the side of the building and get me from behind. And like, that's that sort of stuff right there too. You talk about like the difficulty, where the difficulty starts like dynamically adjusting itself. And it's like, it also does it in a manner of like, where you're too good at a game, it also knows, all right, cool, you're good, let's start ramping it up.
Another one that does it, there was an old mech-based tactical game that I used to play called Ring of Red, and the Ring of Red would learn your
PlayStation 2, baby.
Yeah.
Yes.
It would learn your own strategy, so that way when you got through later levels, the same strategy, the enemies adjusted to that strategy. So, like, if you were favoring planting mines, they would have characters that would pop up with the ability to remove mines. If you started doing things like things that do a high damage, your enemy will start coming up with characters that would have that could restore health. And they just played with it for a bit, and that was really interesting. So we kind of get towards where we're at right now. There's different types of games that are out there that have different abilities, like a genre that made a big comeback and almost died almost as quickly, which is roguelike games. The ability for the game to randomize itself, and that's part of the difficulty curve. Like big ones like Risk of Rain series.
Hades.
Hades is a huge one.
Returnal.
Yep, Returnal's the newest big one that's in the PlayStation 5. I mean, that's your current big one. It's actually out there right now.
Co-op DLC on the way too.
Yeah, free DLC actually. Free.
Yeah, it's a free update.
Ooh, that sounds fun.
Oh yeah, gotta do
Hashtag
it.
not sponsored.
Hashtag could be.
Hashtag will allow sponsorship. But yeah, so roguelikes give you the ability to have which adjusts things on the fly, and it's just random, procedurally generated and randomized on how it goes. So your gameplay is never the same. So with that, it's the difficulty. You could lose immediately at a game. My first run of Hades was horrible. I didn't even make it to the first boss. I made it to the first halfway point boss. I took a bad hit in the face. So when the room took an error, down. I'm like, well, there it is. But that's the point of Hades, because you can do so much stuff after you died. And chit chat with your friendos and such. Risk of Rain 2, amazing multiplayer experience.
Praise be to RNGesus, man.
Easily could get leveled, and they just encourage you to get worse. Other things that change in Dying Rain is how AI is developed. A real big one that you kind of have to, that I recognize is, you have such like Half-Life, when the first Half-Life game when that came out. Its AI was designed to do things that wasn't around for first-person shooters back then. So usually you saw an enemy, you shot the enemy. What the AI did in this case is that they would have a group of 3 or 4 grunts, and they would take cover to dodge your bullets. And you could be fighting one while the other one is trying to flank you from the side.
Yep.
And so they developed tactics to work around that for you.
Though they were very much limited back in the day, that one though too. It's like you didn't start. It wasn't until you got to like where Fear was, where it enhanced the same tactics. Because if I remember correctly, Fear was produced, I think, by Sierra or Valve. I could be wrong on that. I am actually wrong on that.
Yeah, no, it's not that one. Although
Nah,
Halo was one that came out and learned a
yeah.
lot from the AI systems.
Yeah, the AI system in Halo, the traditional Halo AI, like when you deal with like the elites. I mean, Leo, you and I are trying to go through legendary mode in Halo 1. We're getting womped on. And I mean, that's a great example of it right there too, where that's happening. Hello, cat. Sorry. Uh, My yeah, my cat just suddenly graced me and just like, what the?
I got 3. It's
Uh,
fine.
but in any case, so yeah, like that perfect example right there, Halo, great example of that, where the AI is ever evolving, and even though it's still simplistic in its nature, it's the fact that it still challenges you to watch your six, as they say, and a lot of first-person shooters in this day and age now thrive on that. So
Well, and kind of slightly tangential to that, but a lot of first-person shooters these days pretend to be more difficult than they really are. I want to
yeah,
say this started with Half-Life. I'm not positive, but at a certain point, most first-person shooters, when you come across an enemy NPC and they open fire on you, they are programmed to miss those first few shots. You will not get headshotted out of the blue by an enemy you did not know was there. Because first off, that's just not fun. That's not a very fun experience.
But it's realistic.
But it also it makes it seem more difficult. I got shot at. I am so lucky I didn't get killed right there. But that's actually not what happens. It's you there's no way you could have gotten killed right there.
well, and that what you're talking about there too is also known as hit scanners, is what that is, where the moment they fired, you're hit automatically. It doesn't matter what it is. And I mean, only a couple of games still rely upon that. A couple that I know of are like Ion Fury, for example, which is made by 3D Realms, still uses hit scanners. And that's literally what that is. That's actually what it is called, is hit scanners, is because like in your 3D shooting games like Doom, the current Dooms, not the old ones, because the old ones also had hit scanners in them too, but like your current version of Dooms, your current version of Halos, your current version of Call of Duty, they all have where the enemy is intentionally missing you for the first few shots. They're eventually going to start landing those hits because you're taking longer to get rid of them. And that's why it's like when you watch like speed runs, exactly, great example, speed runs of these games. The reason why these guys go down so fast is because A, they remember where they're spawning. B, their shots are not going to hit them half the time. Obviously, when you crank the difficulty up, then you start removing those limiters. But until that happens, yeah, most of your speed runs will have that factor in there too. And then this is no discredit to the speedrunners at all. Like, so any speedrunners who are listening to us understand that what you do is pretty damn impressive. But it's just that in the code and the understanding of it as well, like what Rob does, and pointing it out. When you take out the element of a hit scanner and you put it into where it's like what Brandon said, it's like you get rid of the realism where you're going to get hit automatically in the head by some guy who shoots. It does add the difficulty without actually adding a difficulty.
Yeah, there is. I guess we're up to where we are now. So there is a market and people who love getting to these challenges and such. I know I still go back and play XCOM and make it harder on myself just because I want that challenge for it. And the key I think is that's important is to make sure that the whatever is making it difficult is less frustrating and more of actually a challenge for it. Because if it's going to be frustrating, it'll be always rough every time you get in there. If it's just simply difficult and things are just being working against you for it, and this is just then that's just a way that that's you adapting and overcoming it, and that's the sort of the way that you want that why people would want to keep playing these difficult challenge games. Soulsborne series has made a whole genre just to do that.
Yeah, and I mean, challenge as an engagement type, as a thing that makes games fun, has never truly ever gone away. Back in the past, that was really the only way you had to, you didn't have the memory or the ability to craft a cunning narrative in 8 bits. That wasn't going to happen. You weren't going to get the most amazing sound and art out of 8 bits. You weren't going to be able to have an expansive map that you could go around and explore and discover things in. Those were things that they couldn't do because of technology limitations. And so challenge was one of very few fun things that you could be doing in a game. As technology has moved on, we've got a lot more ways. Now you can have beautiful vistas and wonderful music. You could have compelling narratives. You could have vast places to explore and find all sorts of fun secrets. But challenge is still fun for a lot of people. And so it's, I think, a smaller percentage of games nowadays where challenge is the fun part, but it's that has never gone away. And I think for a little while we swung a little bit in the direction of shying away from challenges because we want to explore all these different types of ways you can enjoy a game. And now we're sort of experiencing more the swing back to, well, this is still fun though, let's keep doing it.
Skyrim's a great example of that. Skyrim's a game that's not super difficult, but the exploration of that is hands down one of the best things I've ever experienced. And then we look at like, you know, going right into the Soul series. Like it's a perfect example where it's like you can still explore, but you are likely going to get your ass handed to you until you start leveling up. Whereas like in Skyrim, you can explore and not have to worry about ever dying. You can stealth most of that game. And sure, you level up while you're stealthing, but you can still stealth most of that game and be just fine. So, I mean, that's a great example because you're absolutely right, Rob. As I am a person who leans more towards, I like my games being tough. I don't like them being rage hard, but I do like them being tough. And for me, it's like, you know, we'll use the latest and the greatest one that just dropped tier 2, Elden Ring. While I don't find Elden Ring as difficult as the other Souls games, I think Elden Ring has a perfect blend of what Skyrim had on top of Dark Souls. And in my opinion, that's what really is, I think, and saying this too for anybody who plays it or understands it, and what Miyazaki, the creator of it, has said. Like the difficulty is never going to stop. They're never going to stop making challenging games, but they are going to work more on making them more expansive in the terms of like your exploration's there. You're going to get to go out and explore the world, see what it is, and understand that at every nook and cranny of that world, you're probably going to come across some guy that's going to kick your ass like back in high school.
You done took my lunch money. Oh no!
Oh no, I'm done. But I mean, like, but that's
more like he's on his way to take your lunch money, sir.
Exactly. But I mean, like, but that's kind of what I'm getting at, though, too. It's like when you talk about that, though, Robin, like that's why I think it's like what you're mentioning is a great example, especially for you, a up and coming game designer as well, going through the school for that. You know, it's one of those things. It's actually kind of nice having a perspective of somebody who actually works on the inside of that, learning it and all the nooks and crannies of how that works too. You know, it's a very fascinating thing to talk about. That I mean, we can keep going on forever, but unfortunately, I have to cut it
We're basically at
too. Yeah, but I mean, you know, it's fascinating, and it's one of those things where it's like I'm 40 years old. I have no intention to stop gaming anytime soon. I'm going to continue to game. I'm going to teach my kids how to game. I'm going to teach them the joys and experience of gaming. I'll let them figure out what they want to play. Obviously, I don't want to submit them to torture yet.
You play Friday the 13th, NES style, round 1. Well, you don't know that 3 characters don't work right in this whole game.
I'm just gonna put it this way. Like I am gonna be that dad though who's like, oh, I want this newest and greatest console. Yeah, well, you got to beat Ninja Gaiden on Nintendo first before you do that.
Oh, fuck off with that noise, dude.
Actually, you know what? I'm gonna make it worse. It's gonna be Ninja Gaiden 3.
God damn, dude.
I understand that you want to marry my daughter. That's interesting. Well, if you can defeat Battletoads on the original NES...
2 players. Beat it with 2 players. So go find somebody to help you on that. Good luck.
Yeah, and you both have to survive the bosses.
But
no, finding the balance between challenge and satisfaction is a never-ending journey, I think, for every game designer, and it's always interesting to see where each game kind of lands on that spectrum. You know?
I agree, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think that's a great place for us to end it. Our next episode will be coming out as if you've made it to the end of this, will be coming out on April 1st. No. Is it April 1st? No, not April 1st.
Yeah, don't make it a joke, dude. Come on.
I'm sorry, I had to figure it out. No, we do have an episode coming out on April 1st. The next one is, after that, is going to be So take this into account. This one would probably be our next episode after this would be on April 15th. So tax day. Enjoy that factor.
My oldest birthday, yo.
Nice.
But yeah, so the next one will come out April 15th, and I'm glad to have you guys on there. Any kind of final thoughts on this before we sign off?
Get good.
If, that was my problem. I did not get good, sir. That's where I went wrong with this.
Get good only applies though in the Souls games though too. I mean,
you're playing Contra, meh.
You have because for the get good, you have to make sure that you give up your life to the gods of the roly polies for that. Yeah.
Do you pledge your allegiance to this covenant?
The covenant of get good.
Covenant get good. All right. And with that, I guess we'll be signing off. I hope you guys enjoyed this little EXP boost. And this is Gaming Theater, logging out.
Toodles.
Peace out.
Later.
Gaming Theater Podcast is hosted, created, produced, and edited by Leo Garcia, the Geek Scorpio. Our music is A Drinking Game. Stock media provided by Stormwave Audio /Pond5. Our cover art is made by Kayla Dawn. You can find her at facebook.com/Kayla Dawn Draws. That's Dawn, DAWN. If you want to send us some financial support to help with producing things for Gaming Theater, you can do so at patreon.com/Gaming Theater Presents. It helps us out. Want to send support that doesn't hit your wallet? Please leave a review with wherever you hear your podcasts and share our podcast with your friends. It really helps out. Thank you for listening.